Think about genealogies. How many of you know what your family genealogy is back to the early 1900s? Can I see your hands? If I were to say, what is your family's name background? What did they do? What are they? You would have some ideas. Okay, a couple hands going up. Coverstone has to do with stonework, masonry work. Not masons, but masonry work. And as we wreck back in England, Scotland, and in Germany, on my father's side, going back 322 years, we know there were castles and bridges built by people named Coverstone, Coverstein, Coverstone, all these different things. I've been called everything in restaurants. Cornerstone, Clapperstone, Clapperstone. I don't even know what that is, but they called me it. But when you think about genealogies, you think about your life and your history and your past, right? You think about your forefathers, your history, your movement around the world. I know people back in Indiana who had relatives who they can trace all the way back to the Pilgrims coming across. Matter of fact, I know somebody who is related to the guy that fell off of one of the boats when they got to the harbor. They talk about that. Several years ago, my mother found out that she has the potential of having some Black Hawk Indian in her bloodstream. And so my sisters began to look at that, work on that, find some things out. I've got one sister who has hair that she's grown almost down to her ankles. I used to have hair. And I had it down to about here at one time. I know that's crazy and scares people, but nonetheless. But my mom would always say, you might have something in you. I don't know what I have in me, except some silliness from time to time. But in looking back, my mom has found out that yes, indeed, there's some Black Hawk Indian in her bloodstream background. So you got to find out, well, where did that come from? And where was this group of Indians from, Native Americans, and how did it work, and who married who? In my family, I've got the Yateses, I've got some Bedwells, and I've got some Sparks. I know that my grandma had a sister whose husband moved her to the Bowling Green area sometime about 1921. And Doug, you've still not found that family member I'm related to down here. You're working good. Well, keep working on it. So if you know any Sparkses in the Bowling Green area, let me know, because I might be related somehow, some way down the line. But you find the family name. You find where they've been, what they've done. You find their history and their stories. I've talked at every funeral. I have a story. My grandma told me about my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather who liked to blow up outhouses with dynamite. He worked for the railroad. He did a bunch of other stuff. He was an ornery guy. I probably would have become a whole lot like him if I got saved. But nonetheless, I know those stories because my grandma told me and my brother those stories. Just like you've heard stories about what your family did or your parents did or whatever in that regards. So you find the family connection, the famous people. Who they are and where they are and how much money might be in it for you if you're related, right? People look for those sort of things in that regards. Connection to power or leadership. But often in the church world we don't see the importance of our roots. I am a first generation Pentecostal. My mom's a Christian, but she's never been baptized in the Spirit. Most of my family wasn't. But because I got saved in that church, and filled with the Spirit, now I've got a second generation of Pentecostal kids in our family. All three of my kids are baptized in the Spirit, praying in tongues. And I'm hoping when grandkids do come, that they become the third generation of Pentecostals in my family. Because you trace Coverstone all the way back, 322 years, I'm the first Pentecostal pastor in my family. And I'm glad I'm not the last, and hope I won't be the last in that regards. Genesis 5 is in the Pentateuch for a reason, because we're going to preach through a genealogy today. We should all go, yeah! Oh, that's so exciting! You know, it's like whoamI.com. Well, we'll see in that regards. And even when we don't see the importance of it all, you're going to find it out here real quick. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and He blessed them and named them man in the day in which they were created. When Adam lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and he named him Seth. Then the days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So even after so between Abel and Seth, we know he had some babies, and afterward he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh. And then Seth lived 807 years after he became the father of Enosh. And he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And you're thinking, Pastor Dana, what can you preach from this? Well, let me show you. There's good, the bad, and the ugly in your family and in mine. Let's face it. Somewhere along the lines, we all become the Heinz 57 situation. You ever had a dog and you're like, I don't know what you are. I know you're a dog, but I don't have any idea what kind of dog you are. When I was a kid, people dropped dogs off in our neighborhood all the time, and we had to keep every single one of them, because that's what good people do. You can't believe how many cats and dogs are sometimes left at the recycling center, end up on our porch. But we find there's all these different things out there. And one day, someone's going to be telling you your story to grandkids or great-grandkids that never met you, talked to you, or saw you, only know about you from the stories that are told about them. Think about that. Think about that. But what matters is not how long you live or how long they live, but how you live. That little dash on the cemetery memorial. Got to thinking the other day, my mom will be 91 on New Year's Day. And I'm going to go the week after Christmas and spend a day or two with her. And so on my dad's grave, my dad's gravestone, there's a part, his date of birth and death is there, and there's a dash. And now there's my mom's, and it says the date she was born and this little dash. And I got to thinking about how much life there is between the birthday and the dash. All the things that she's seen, all the things that she's done, all the things that she's accomplished. I'm grateful for that. But you're also going to see two phrases that happen in this passage, chapter 5, continuously. Ties it up. Here it is. You're going to see the words, he died. And he had other sons and daughters. Are going to be written 17 times in this chapter. 17 times. The words, he died. Just like you heard about Seth, and he died. Adam, and he died. Enosh, and he died. And he had other sons and daughters, and there's an important reason for that. Let's keep reading. Enosh lived 90 years, became the father of Kenan. Then Enosh lived 815 years after he became the father of Kenan, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. You got to do it better than that. And he died. Okay? That's a very important part. Kenan lived 70 years and became the father of Mahalalel. Then Kenan lived 840 years after he became the father of Mahalalel, and he had other sons and daughters. So the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. Are you seeing a consistent pattern so far about the life in which you and I live? Mahalalel lived 65 years and became the father of Jared. Then Mahalalel lived 830 years after he became the father of Jared. And he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Are you seeing once again a consistent pattern in the word here? Life doesn't go on forever. Even though God had intended that it would. So all the days of Mahalalel, Jared lived 162 years, became the father of Enoch. And then Jared lived 800 years after he became the father of Enoch. And he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Can you imagine having over 200 grandchildren to get presents for Christmas? So the names matter here. Some of those names stand out in history. How many were thinking about Mahalalel before you came to church today? How many in the last 10 years of your life thought, man, that Mahalalel, he lived a long time? Anybody woke up this morning thinking about Kenan? I want to know more about that name. No. But some names stand out. Right now in America, the population, according to the last census we had, 332,278,200 people live in this country, but I want to know, how many of them do you know? How many of them do you know on a personal basis? How many of you had personal conversations with, talked to, emailed, Facebook Messengered them? How many do you really know in a personal and relational way? Names, faces, heritages, legacies, all those things, they will continue regardless of how long you live or what you do with your life. Think about that. Somehow, some way in American history, your death and your life will be recorded in paperwork. Do you ever wonder how many pages of paperwork the IRS has on each one of you? You might make it worth their time, Doug. But how many of us can think about, I mean, all of your records, every one of you that is old enough here to know that somebody kept track of your grade school records. Every time you've given blood, there's a record of that. Every website you've hit on the internet, somebody knows. Every time you've paid a bill. You know, we talk about having a paper trail. Does anybody realize you got more paper now than you had 10 years ago when they said, we're going to go paper-free? Yeah, right. That's how it goes in the world. And I want to ask the question, what will your life mean when it's over? Who will impact, what will accomplish during your lifetime? At the end of the day, you draw your last breath on that bed and you pass away. What's the family going to say? You invested, you did. What are they going to say about your investment or your involvement? What are they going to say about what you did with the gifts and talents and ability that God has given you? It's about your life. It's about your heritage. It's about going on. We're going to continue with this. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God for 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. But we do not see that word, and he died. Good news for Enoch. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not. In other words, he did not die. When you see that phrase, you got to compare it to what's not here. And he died. In other words, Enoch beat the death penalty. Enoch beat what had happened in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve sinned. For God took him. So for whatever it was about his life, God took him. Methuselah lived 187 years and became the father of Lamech. You've heard that name? Then Methuselah lived 782 years and became the father of Lamech, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Are you catching the pattern? The one righteous man in Enoch did not die. He was not. So this young father had something go on. Enoch lived 65 years and had a child. So at 65 years of age, he was one of the youngest fathers in that world. Think about that. Imagine having your first child at 65. There was an interview a couple of years ago with a lady who had given birth at like 68 years old. And they said, are you happy about it? She said, I am not happy about anything. All right, all right, all right. He fathered the child. So the youngest dad had the guy that lived to be the oldest man. So think about that in that regards. Look at the perspective. I don't know why God took Enoch. Obviously, his life pleased God. Obviously, his life was glorifying God. Obviously, he was doing his best to live by the rules, the standards, the commandments that had not been given literally, but were in the heart of the men of mankind. So he realized someone was watching his life. He lived right. Obviously, those around him saw that Enoch had lived right. And I wonder what the conversation was. Anybody seen Dad? He's not in the field. He's not out working on the tractors. I don't know where he is. Newspapers, have you seen Enoch? Anybody seen Enoch? Something tells me that Enoch had a sensation. He said, okay, folks, I need to gather up all the family kids together. You just need to know something. I think the Lord's going to take me. Take you where? Well, to heaven. Well, but what do you mean? What's he going to take you? I just know I'm not going to be around for a while. So he gets the inheritance taken care of, gets all the paperwork done, goes to the bank, signs papers, does all that, you know, contacts the taxing authority and this and that. But one day he's gone. Just gone. All because he lived his life like he was supposed to. At 365, God took Enoch out. At 365 years of age, God took Enoch basically because he had walked with God, he had that sanctity of his life, and he lived it out every single day. You ever wonder if God sometimes looks out on a crowd or looks down the earth and says, maybe I should just take those 4 people with me? You ever wonder if he looks over Africa, India? Maybe he looks at these nations like Islamabad, or cities like Islamabad, in Pakistan, or Lebanon, or Jordan, and says, you know what, those people are going to be killed brutally murdered here in a couple of weeks. I could just speak their name and call them out. Obviously God was watching. He was watching Enoch's life. Enoch did it right. Enoch lived the right way. And so it just simply says, for God took him. God kept him from death. God kept him from dying. God kept him from having those words, and he died after his name. So what does that event say in the world in which we live? Even then, before the law was written out on stones, it was written on the hearts of men. Adam and Eve had shared how they were supposed to live, the mistakes they'd made, the generations were coming. We're getting further and further away from that Genesis chapter 2 and 3 event. People are starting to live, they're living longer because the gene pool is still basically pure, but corruption is happening, sin is happening, and the consequences of sin is death. So we see things changing, things shifting. But my question is, why would God not want to leave a man like Enoch there so everybody could see how you're supposed to do it? Heard the story one time of a guy, and this is from a friend who worked in the industry. He was a cake decorator. Long before you got sued for not baking cakes for certain people or situations. And he was having trouble making a certain type of flour with the icing and the bag and the little, the intricate little tip. And the guy he worked with had been like a German baker. Had been trained in Germany, it was just straight and narrow, that was it. He was well known in like 5-star hotels and events and things. He got paid very, very well, and he happened to be being trained by this guy. He had to make these things on a piece of paper, and then the guy would come by and look at it. He said one day he'd put these all out, and they all kind of waited with their big white top hats and everything. And here comes the guy. He looks at one, and he goes, "Not acceptable." And the guy said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "You got to make it like mine." And so he tried and he tried and he kept hearing, "Unacceptable, unacceptable, unacceptable." And he got to the end of the room and he said, "I don't know what to do." And he says, "Watch how I make it." He'd always seen the guy, he was sitting out like you folks in the church, and he'd see the chef up there doing this, and maybe, "Well, there it is, do it like me." And the guy said, I got like this close to his hand. And I watched, and he said, "Will you make 3 of these?" And he said, "By the time you get there, I'll get it." And he watched him make each one. And the guy did it very slowly. Made 2 more, make the other 2, and he watched it very slowly. He said, "Before you make the 3rd one, let me try." So he began to make the flour, whatever it was, just like the guy. And he says, and the guy, instead of saying, "Unacceptable," he said, "Close, but not acceptable yet." So he made another one because he hasn't made the 3rd one yet. He makes the 2nd one, and the guy says, "You are nearer than you were." The guy very slowly made it with his hands, with the chef. And then the gentleman, basically while he was making it, the guy came up right beside him and made it right alongside. And when he pulled it off, the chef said, "You are now as good as me." Enoch must have been watching God pretty close. And I'm wondering, why not leave Enoch, if he's that kind of person, living the right life the right way, why not leave Enoch there so people can watch his life? See, to me, this makes absolutely no sense at all in the Bible. You already got a problem with sin and corruption. Why take your best example out? You see where I'm going with this? Why? Anybody here want your kids to have good friends? Anybody here ever want to kill your friends' friends? Come on, be honest, we're in church. Thank you, Johnny. Did it involve a large, high-caliber weapon, though? You say, yep, it's okay. We all know what you're thinking, Johnny. But think about this. You've got the example that the world needs to see how to live a life. And at 365, God says, Enoch, come on up here with me. I would hope that some of the family was thinking, they'd be thinking, wait, God, Dad was a good guy. Grandpa was a great guy. Why'd you take him? He was an example. He did this, he did that. Why did you take him? And yet, God's ways are higher than ours, even in today's world. Please understand, folks, that somebody is watching you at all times. They're watching how you do things, what you say, who you talk to, what you talk about. They're watching how you live. Every single day of the week, they're watching because they're looking for something. And now we get to this. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah. This one will give us rest from our work and from the Lord, the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed. Who said this? Lamech, the father, had a word of knowledge about his son Noah. Because it says, then he called his name Noah, saying. In other words, Lamech gives birth to has his son. And God shows him that this son is going to make a huge difference in the world. He's going to give us a rest from our work, from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground. What did God do through Noah to the ground? Covered it. And about 18.5 miles of water. Because if you look at the mountains like Ararat or Mount Everest, you're talking 19 to 20,000 feet high. Think about that. Lamech had no understanding of what his son was going to do. Then Lamech lived 595 years after he became the father of Noah. And he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died not having any idea of what that prophetic word, that word of knowledge that God gave Lamech about his son was going to be. And I would imagine after 770 years, or even after 565 years after Noah was born, something tells me that word was still there. They weren't putting people in the nursing homes at 85 and 90 in that time. These people retained all those stories, all those situations. They kept the history together for all that they'd done, all they said, how they lived. They kept those things in their head. Noah was 500 years old, and Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And what do you see? Not there. And he died. You see, this genealogy comes to almost like a brutal stop. Because the times were changing. Enoch had been taken in the last 1,000 years, so to speak. Hey, Methuselah would be at 969 years, so almost over 1,000 years of history has passed. Lamech, Noah's dad, dies at 777 years of age, and now here we are. There was and he died with Noah. Now, we do know that Noah died on the other side of the flood. We do know that Noah's sons and their wives and Noah's wife all died on the other side of the flood. And if you look biologically and historically, you will find that soon after the flood, people were not living to be 622 years, or 969 years, or 777 years. All of a sudden, they're dying less than 100 years of age. That curse of the ground that Noah was going to take away or be dealt with, that Lamech heard and saw, had no clue what it was going to mean for that planet. And that genealogy ends because God's about to take the whole world down an incredibly different angle. And the next thing we'll be reading about is Noah's life and the ark that he built. And all the ridicule he got for the 100 years he spent building that. You're going to have to wonder about what his wife and his kids said. Dad, you are a maniac. What are you doing? Are you sure God told you this? Are you sure God spoke to you in dreams and visions about a boat? You never had a chance to go to the Ark Encounter? I highly recommend it. Yes. They've got some resources. To be able to walk up to that Ark and see the length and the depth, and it's just like, wow. It was big enough for so many people, so many animals, so many plant life, so many seeds. It was a refuge. It was a place of safety. And yet when God shut the door, and the one thing I wanted to stand on the inside of that ark and stand up against the door and just look at it. Like that. Realize how there was no way human beings could have shut that door. If you read Genesis, it says that God is the one that shut that door in that regards. Basically, things were changing. The ark was the future. The flood is future, and Noah never saw it coming. Which is why sometimes in life we get hit by tragedies or atrocities. Nobody probably went to bed Friday night thinking my family member will not wake up Saturday morning. In Mayfield, Kentucky, Dawson Springs, Kentucky, or Bowling Green. Nobody probably looked at their foundation, the roof of their house Friday night and said, I think we're good. No one imagined that strewn all over acres of ground. Noah never saw what God was going to do through his life. Which is why God spoke to his father Lamech and said, this is the one that will deal with and address the cursing of the ground. And that goes back to the very day Adam and Eve sinned. When the curse began, when sin became the corrupting force. And he said, basically, what happened in the garden, Noah, you're going to be the person that helps deal with it. Can you imagine holding that in your heads? Can you imagine knowing the bigger you're building this boat, you're thinking about your family being on it, making sure you got enough room for your family, and now you're realizing that every day you're preaching the gospel, you're trying to be righteous and holy, you're trying to tell people, hey, you're going to have to get this ark, and people are laughing and mocking and joking, and there's a whole world right now that will one day not mock him. The Bible says every knee will bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, and the glory of God the Father. And I promise you, there'll be a lot of people that day saying, oh God, forgive me. He's going to say it's too late. It's too late. And that's the scary part of it. You and I exist right here in the here and now. We can influence the future through our children, through our activities, through our love for Christ. From the moment Jennifer conceived all three of our kids, we began to pray for Keela and for Micah and for Hannah. We prayed, Lord, show us what to name them. I'm still sitting strumming my guitar next to Jennifer, sometimes at night. I can't remember which one it was, but one of them used to just kick you like crazy every time I played guitar. I think it was Micah. Can't remember for sure. We would speak to them in the womb, tell them all sorts of stories, tell them how to vote. We do that to your kids in the womb, folks. Want to raise them right, you know. We talk about things in the world. We would tell them how much we couldn't wait to see them. Most of you probably still remember the first time you held your kids. I bawled, and I bawled. You're holding something that's a part of you, and then you realize there's no manual to take home. You got to change the diapers. This is the child you're going to raise, and they're going to end up being a lot like you in different ways, good, bad, and ugly. And you begin to realize that I am spiritually responsible for this child. God will hold me accountable for how I raise them, what I do with them. And they're in the future will, in a lot of ways, they'll handle money like you did. They'll talk about people or races like you did. They'll make jokes like you did. They'll laugh at things like you did. A couple years ago, one of our young men in the youth group, they would want me to laugh to see how much I laugh like Micah, or Micah laughed like me. Jennifer got sent some pictures from a family member. And looking back when she was a little girl, looking at my kids in those pictures growing up, and I got to see the two miniature schnauzers we had back in Indiana, Alethe and Caris. We had grace and truth in our house. That's what those words meant. They were Greek names, and that's what it meant, grace and truth. And it was like, man, look at us. We were so young and so healthy, and we were so young, and I had hair, and all these other things to go with it. But those pictures remind us of where we've been. The kids were not even in the picture yet. It was just me and Jennifer and the two dogs. And then there's that little picture of Keela wearing a butterfly outfit. She's like this tall, scrunched up, Remember what we brought her home in? And I remember I'd take her to church with me to work, and I would walk with her at the altar in the mornings, even before church. I'd pray in tongues over my little girl. Do that with all three of the kids. I'd pray in tongues over them. I'd pray for God to give me wisdom, to help me be the best dad I can be, to help me understand how to handle them in situations. I prayed for favor in their lives. I prayed for God to reveal their call, His call on their life. We prayed over our kids because we were starting to realize as young parents that, man, what we do matters. Let's just make it clear. All parenting matters. That was the life that we had to understand and deal with and address. And so the question I want to ask you is this. What will your future say about how you raise your kids? What will your future say about what kind of mom, what kind of dad, what kind of daughter, what kind of son? Before my dad passed away, there was a couple weeks in the nursing home there in Indiana that I had with him. And I kept thinking back to when I was not saved. And things I had said and things I had done to my dad I'm ashamed of. But I was angry and mad because of the drunkenness that was coming out. I remember having just hateful thoughts about my dad. I remember getting in fights, and when I was in fight, I was thinking about punching my dad. And that brought out this aggression in me that made it even worse for me. But I remember saying, Lord, if there's anything else I need to ask my dad to forgive me for, Lord, show me, show me, show me. I had no idea my dad was going to have a massive heart attack and stroke and be gone one morning. All that week I prayed and had heard nothing. Nothing about, well, this or that. I want to make sure I was right. We had a lock-in the night before, and that's where you have a bunch of kids stay up all night and do crazy things in the youth room. And got all the kids home in the van, and I got to the house, and phone rang, and it was a nurse. Clay Smith from the church sat in Jason's room. He said, Pastor Dan, your dad's just had a massive heart attack. And you want to see him, you got to get here as soon as you can. I think I was taking a shower when we got the phone call. I can't remember it all. But we got Keelan Mike. He met my son. Never got to meet him. But I remember taking my two kids. We flew them in the back of the car. I turned the hazard lights on and I drove fast. I drove faster than you did yesterday, Doug. I would have passed you 3 times. Remember getting to that hospital? Walked up the door, and Clay Smith was there, and he said, Pastor, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away about 3 minutes ago. And although it's another story that I share at all the funerals that I do, Man, in that moment, what I would give for that 3 minutes back. And one of the things that to this day doesn't haunt me, it doesn't keep me up at night, but I wonder, God, was there anything else I should have said, Dad, I'm sorry for saying this. Dad, I'm sorry for doing that. And you know what? Sometimes, from time to time, when I think about my dad, every time I stand before his gravestone, when I go into town, back in Jasonville, Indiana, I wonder. My dad made a lot of mistakes, but I got my dad back towards the end of his life. I'm so grateful for that. He got to hear me preach. I would do nursing home services once a week, and they would wheel him down and bring the bed down, and he got to hear me preach. I got to talk with him. My dad met my son Micah in a Danville, Illinois veterans nursing home. Remember, we made about an hour and a half drive to see him. And we set Micah on his lap, on his chest, and my dad just began to cry because he wanted a grandson so bad. We all have those kind of memories, don't we, about the people that we love, the people that we miss. But you know what? Those folks invested in you and they invested in me, and they did it for a reason, so that our lives could make a difference generations from now. And although my dad did not do a lot of spiritual investment in my life, there were men in that church in Jasonville that did. I prayed the way that I prayed. Aggressively, publicly, out loud, whatever. I prayed that way because there were men who prayed around. They modeled for me how to pray. I got to see some incredible board members at that church as a kid, both who invested in me and as I worked there as a youth pastor. I began to see people who invested in me. Had a pastor, Sam Bush, who was still at Jasonville in his early 70s. Been there for over 30 years. His longevity has spoken to my life. And working with him for 10 years. I do a lot of things in church ministry like he did. Why? Because I saw it was stable and solid. And it would invest. But I'm thankful for what was invested in me. But I have to ask the question, what am I doing with my kids? Future grandkids. And I'm going to say something else. I know some of you have made some funny comments to Mike and Emma. We want God's timing for them to have grandkids. Okay, I understand that. After Jennifer and I got married, I think a week after we got married, someone was in our Facebook, grandkids. We're not bothered by that by any means, understand that. But people get excited. I can't wait to hold a little Coverstone again. Because it's been a long time. But I'm already praying for grandkids I don't have yet. And I'm praying for great-grandkids I don't have yet. Should the Lord tarry, I'm praying that God invests in me so that I can invest in them. And so I just want to ask that question. What will the future say about you? I might do some of your funerals. Most likely will. I don't know who will do mine. Probably my son. Hope he tells some stories. But I hope he'll understand the investment that we placed in him for both ministry and being a person. Those two phrases, and he died, and he had other sons and daughters, means this: life goes on after you're gone and I'm gone. But what happens after we're gone depends completely on what we did while we were alive. So make sure what you're doing, make sure what you're investing, make sure what you're pouring in. Folks, I'm telling you, it matters. And that's why genealogy in Genesis chapter 5 is just as important as the creative process in Genesis chapter 1. Or what's written in John 3:16, or chapter 3 of John. All these things matter. Why? Because you have a future even once you're gone here. It's lived out in the kids and grandkids. It's lived out in the business principles you put to work. It's lived out in all those things that you do right now. So think about that. It's kind of scary, isn't it? I hope that one day I've got grandkids or great-grandkids that are remembering the funny stories about me. I'll show them the pictures of me with hair. Or somebody else maybe will. I can see Mikey saying, yeah, your grandpa used to have hair a long time ago. Shows them this picture. But I hope he'll really share with them I had a love for the Lord. I wanted to make a difference in the world. That I had a heart for missions. That I love my wife. That I love my kids unconditionally. I hope they understand I did my very best with the finances that I've been given. And not just to leave something for them, but that I've heard the principles of the Holy Spirit in my life. For everything I do and the way that I live. Every decision I make. I pray that my kids, and my grandkids, and my great-grandkids, and however many more there may be before the Lord comes, I pray that they know those things, because I've got a future. And long after I'm gone, my family will be talking about me. And you have a future. And one day they'll be talking about you too. Will you stand your feet with me? I want you to pray and just assess your life. The things that you want the Lord to do in you. Places you want Him to take you. And let's just remember that we will have a heritage and a legacy. Let's make it one that glorifies Jesus. Spirit of the living God, I pray you come upon us in such a powerful way right now that we would be reminded that what we do in this life matters, that what we say in this life matters, that how we live matters.